All right, thank you everyone for coming. This is Sydney McCartan, and this is her capstone presentation.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Sydney McCartan, I'm a junior, and my project is on the world of forensic science, specifically what we perceive it to be versus what it really is. So, kind of like weird, you can see it. But
I'm
so
gonna turn off the lights.
okay. To start off, I have some background, which is how we got to where we are today in the field and why I chose this project. Second, I'll talk about why it's so important in cases and in the courtroom. And then to illustrate that, I'll show you some real life cases in which forensic science was used to exonerate people who were wrongfully convicted. And then I'll go into the people behind the field, who are the forensic scientists. Okay, so first is background, which is history, evolution, and modern applications. Oh, oops, okay. So I chose this project because I always liked science and true crime, and I thought forensic science was a perfect mix of both of them. And I thought a capstone could help me look at the different opportunities in the field and learn more about it. So this is a camp I did, and we had to analyze blood stains, so that's what's behind us. So now for my actual project, what is forensic science? So one of the core principles of forensic science is by Dr. Edmund Lochard, who created Lochard's exchange principle. He said that it's impossible for a criminal to act, especially considering the intensity of a crime, without leaving traces of this presence. In other words, he knew that if a person was at a scene of the crime, they would either leave behind something or take something with them. And that's how we would know who was there. So that combined with this idea from my mentor, Cheryl Curiero, who's the assistant director of forensic biology and DNA at the Connecticut Forensic Science Laboratory. She says that everything in forensics is basically an unknown from evidence compared to a known. Like a fingerprint found at the scene of the crime can be compared to other fingerprints in databases to learn whose fingerprint it is. So those two ideas together kind of give us a good basis of what forensic science is. And it's been expanding from when it was first used, perhaps in 200 BCE, when Archimedes was able to prove that his king's crown was not real gold because he compared an unknown to a known, and he took his king's crown and he took some real gold and he compared the densities and he found out that it was not real. So the person who put this science to actual use was, again, Dr. Edmund Lochard, who was given his own crime scene investigation laboratory in 1910 by the Lyons, France Police Department. And in 1923, the US got our own crime scene investigation laboratory in Los Angeles, USA. And now we have over 400 crime labs in the US today, and over 40,000 people involved. So there are many uses of forensic science today, the biggest obviously being crime scene investigation, which would involve processing the scene and analyzing samples found, which would give us insight to what happened at the scene of the crime. And our first misconception of the day is that this is the only thing that forensic science is used for. When in fact, there are a lot of uses for forensic science. Another one being victim identification, which uses DNA, which is the most accurate form of identification, especially when a victim is in a car crash or if they're burned. It's hard to just visually identify them. So if enough DNA is retrieved, a positive ID can be made. And that was used in the World Trade Center terrorist attacks and in the 2011 Tohoku tsunami in Japan. And also safety, just preventing crimes from even happening. This is specifically forensic chemistry and toxicology. So toxicology, if a police pulls over somebody because they suspect they're driving under the influence, they can get a toxicology panel and that'll tell them how much alcohol is in their blood and if they should be driving. Also at customs, if you declare any plants or animals, they all have to be tested to make sure you're not transporting illegal stuff. So now for importance, why do we need forensic science to solve cases? So I invite everyone to watch this stereotypical whodunit video. And there's a question at the end, so pay attention. Okay, I'm playing it. Oh, yeah. Oh, should I put it in full screen?
Who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the grass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his water stove below stairs.
I I was planting my petunias in the poppy field. Constable, arrest Lady Smile. How did you know, madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is how observant were you?
Can anyone name a change that happened between the beginning or the end? No. Okay, good job. You weren't supposed to. So this is all due to one reason in particular, which is pointed out by Scott Fraser, who's a forensic neurophysiologist with an expertise in eyewitness memory identification. He says that the brain abhors a vacuum. So let me explain what I mean here. So say there's a crime and there's an eyewitness to this crime. They might consider the build of a person, their face, what car they drove, or what weapon they used. Now, in a perfect world, these pieces all come together and they form a picture of the crime, so we know what happened and who did it. But the world is not perfect. And more specifically, our memories are far from perfect. Even in the best conditions, our brain only stores bits and pieces of information. So when this eyewitness goes to recall what happened, they don't get the full picture. For example, they might forget some aspects of this person, and unbeknownst to them, they'll create reconstructed memories, and their brain will fill in any information that they're missing. So this 6'2" man can become 5'6" in this person's head. Now, as I said before, this happens even in the best conditions. And obviously when a crime happens, the eyewitness isn't going to be expecting it. So this shock doesn't help with the recollection of events, which is also what happened in the video, because I didn't tell you what you were looking for, and then you didn't look for it, and then you didn't know what changes happened. So following this logic, can we trust that an eyewitness will have a perfect memory and recollection of the events? If you still say yes, though, I'll show you some statistics. So the Innocence Project has had 237 victories as of April 2022, and 193 of them have been because of DNA exonerations. So that's about 81% of all cases, which again goes to show how important forensic science is. And the number one cause of wrongful convictions is eyewitness misidentification, which accounts for about 63% of wrongful convictions. So what does this mean? The bottom line is eyewitness accounts are fallible. They cannot be solely trusted. On the contrary, science is not. It's like, Lochard points out, this is evidence that does not forget. It is not confused by the excitement of the moment. It is not absent because human witnesses are. It is factual evidence. Physical evidence cannot be wrong. It cannot perjure itself, and it cannot be wholly absent. Forensic science needs to be heard. It needs to be heard in courtrooms, and it needs to be heard in our judicial system. It's changed the world, and it's for the better because we need it. So now to illustrate this point even further, I'll show you some real cases where forensic science has actually been used. So first is James Tillman. He was exonerated by DNA testing in 2006 with the help of Connecticut Innocence Project. He was convicted on September 19th, 1989 of sexual assault, kidnapping, robbery, assault, and larceny. He was sentenced to 45 years, and he served 17 of those, of which he shouldn't have served because he didn't do the crime. So the crime happened on January 22nd, 1988, in which a 26-year-old female was sitting in her car in Hartford, Connecticut, and a man broke into her car, drove her to a secluded spot, raped her, drove away, and ran away from the scene of the crime. At the scene of the crime, semen was found on this woman's clothing, and a forensic analyst testified that it could have come from James Tillman, along with about 20% of the male population. So this analyst also neglected to say that degradation could have happened, which would have changed the results of the test. That's where the flawed forensic science comes from. But there was another factor, which was an eyewitness misidentification that was by the victim, of which this conviction was almost entirely based on. So although Tillman maintained his innocence, the jury found him guilty of all charges. And then in 2005, the Innocence Project took the case, and they performed even more advanced tests, and they found that Tillman was excluded from every single one of them, which means that it wasn't his semen at the scene of the crime. Then on July 11th, 2006, he was released without bail, and he was cleared without all charges because of DNA testing. So next is Francisco Carrillo. He is another case in which eyewitness testimony failed. On January 8th, 1991, in Linwood, California, a father walked outside to his son and his son's 5 friends, and he was shot in a drive-by shooting. In just 24 hours, Francisco was chosen as the suspect. The police prepared a photo array and presented it to one of the friends who was able to make a positive identification to Francisco. Now, the first trial, all 6 of the son and his friends testified to this identification, but it ended in a hung jury. So they had a second trial, but before that, the first eyewitness recanted his statement. However, the prosecution proceeded and the 5 other witnesses testified to their identification, and he was charged without any evidence tying him to the case, and he was given a life sentence in 1992. There was no car, there was no weapon, and there was no driver ever found. So then there was a new trial, and before the hearing, all of the friends and the son recanted their statements because it was the police who told them to choose Francisco and then tell his friends to all choose him. So he wasn't actually the person. The other aspect of this was that Scott Fraser, who was a forensic psychologist I talked about before, he recreated the scenes and all the lighting, and he figured out that even if they were telling the truth, they couldn't have seen anyone in the car due to the lighting, so they couldn't have made an identification no matter what. This, along with new evidence, helped to set Francisco Carrillo free after 21 years in prison that he shouldn't have spent. So again, what am I trying to say here? 1, while it's valuable, our memory isn't perfect, and we need to be cautious about believing every single thing our brain recalls. Most times these people weren't trying to lie. They really believed what they were saying was true. But the fact is that our memories are created and then they're recreated because of racial bias, like in these 2 cases, or because of things we learned after the fact. This is not our fault, but what is our fault is believing everything our brain tells us. Another misconception is that science does not belong in the courtroom. But what I hope these cases showed you is that it does. It has its place there because the world is for the better because of this. And without it, these people would still be in prison for crimes they didn't commit. Okay, sorry. So now the job of a forensic scientist who is behind the case. So what a lot of people think when they think of forensic science is examining the scene, processing the evidence, and then sending it to a lab. But this is all wrong because, like the name suggests, forensic scientists are scientists. At the end of the day, they're in the lab, they're processing the evidence there. And this is for a really specific reason. So in Connecticut, we have the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. And a few of the things that are under that is 1, emergency management and homeland security, which helps Connecticut citizens be prepared in case of emergency. Then we have the police, who are the people who are actually at the scene of the crime. They're the people who are collecting the evidence, and they're the people solving it to figure out who did it. Then we have scientific services, and that's where forensic scientists come in. They are specifically separated from the CT State Police because they're not supposed to be biased. They are not for the defense. They are not for the prosecution. They're just scientists in a lab doing tests. Yeah. So now that we know what they don't do, here is what they do. So DNA is one of the biggest disciplines in forensic science. And so if any DNA is found at the crime scene, a profile can be created and it can be compared with CODIS to other profiles. Then there's latent prints, where if any prints are found at the scene, they can be processed in APHIS, and that lets scientists compare those prints with any suspects. Then there's forensic biology, which is really important. It preps the sample, and which might be like a swab or cuttings, and it gets it ready for DNA analysts to test. And another important thing they do is, like, if any red fluid is found at the scene, they'll make sure not only is it blood, but it's human blood, so it works with the tests. Then there is computer crimes, which helps to track down pedophiles using software programs. And they can also help with homicides and drug deals because they can tap into a car's GPS system. There's also forensic chemistry, which they might analyze fibers, debris, paint, drugs, or remnants from explosives. And there's also 2 little disciplines under that, which is toxicology and controlled substances. So toxicology works with, again, the DUIs, what I mentioned before, and they can test the amount of alcohol or drugs that's in the blood or the urine of somebody, and control substances, make sure that any drug found is actually that drug. And then there's firearms. Okay. And that works with guns and cartridges. They get a lot of those. And they have a shooting tank, which they can test fire into. And then they can compare that with shots in NIBIN, which will tell them if the gun was used in any other crime. And then there's pathology, forensic pathology, and anthropology. Pathology tells us when this body might have died, what might have happened to it, and yeah, the cause and time of death. And anthropology works specifically with the skeletal system, and that'll tell us the circumstances which this person died. And it can also make identifications. So beyond the disciplines, forensic scientists have other work as well. They do presentations to schools like these. They go to court, which only 4 to 5% of cases actually do make it to court, but they might testify to what evidence they have. They do proficiency tests to make sure their labs are up to date, and they do trainings with police officers. And again, one of the biggest parts of the job is waiting, because tests don't come back in hours, they come back in days if they want to be very accurate. And there's a lot of cases that are waiting to be processed. So there's a lot of waiting, and TV shows don't show that part. So if you really liked my presentation and you want to learn more, we have a lot of stuff at our school. We have the forensic chemistry class that's happening at GHS next year. There's TED Talks, which is where I got a lot of information from, and they're very specific and they're experts in their field, so they're really good. And the Innocence Project shows a lot of cases where DNA might have been used. And then there's so many other resources. As long as you look not at TV shows, there's a lot of good information out there. And then this is my special thank you, but you can't really see it. It's to Mr. Foti, who's my capstone advisor, Ms. Scalisi, to the capstone coordinator, Ms. Carrero, who's my mentor, and then my audience who came to me and listened to my presentation. So thank you.
Questions? I have a few. So is this a career you're still thinking about after going through all of this?
Yes, I kind of am even more interested in it because I'm kind of scared of blood. And like when I was taking my course, it was like one of the things that I hated, and I was like, oh, this is really turning me away. And then my mentor was like, no, we don't even deal with that. Like that's not even a thing we do. And I was like, oh, awesome, perfect. So I do like science, and I plan to go into molecular biology and biochemistry. So yeah, it's definitely something I'm still looking into. And I know there's not like, it's like kind of a hard field to get into, but yes, I'm still very much interested.
Was there a particular area of all of like the different things that you found most interesting?
Yeah, I think forensic biology and DNA, which is what also my mentor does. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the part that I was most interested in.
That's awesome. What did you learn about yourself as a learner doing a capstone project?
I think I learned that I'm not very good with time management, and I need to really work on like, because again, the capstone, it's like one of those projects that's due at the end of the year. So it's like without the check-ins, like you must have 60 hours by now. Like I probably wouldn't have made it. So it's like, I need to like, I'm a very scheduled person, and without that, like I don't manage my time well, because it's like, it's with capstone, it's like, oh, if you have any extra time, you should be doing your capstone. But it's like, sometimes it's hard to like put yourself into that. But yeah, that's what I learned.
And what would you say is like the most positive takeaway from your capstone experience?
I mean, I did like a lot of the research, and like it was cool to take part in a really big project where like it was something I was interested in, and it was something that like a lot of research was done, and it wasn't just like a silly like one of the class projects. So that's probably the positive thing, that it's something I was so interested in, and it's something that like I put so much work into, and I came out with a product I really enjoyed. So yeah.
Any other questions? Great, Sid, good job.
Thank you. And Cook's coming in like 2 hours. Yeah.
All right, today we have Jasmine Acevedo's capstone project. So Jasmine, take it away.
Thank you.
Just makes you have to look yourself.
Okay, so my project is called the Picture Project.
Go ahead.
So
Hold on. It's just because I was touching things.
so my project is mainly supposed to be about photography and how perspectives can be kind of, it can vary through anyone's perspective. And while I wanted to talk about more historical figures that I find to be my heroes and their pictures presenting their empowerment to BIPOC people of color, Black and Indigenous people of color. I chose this topic to show how they've kind of helped us with being like giving us the courage to fight against our oppressors, and there are also like 2 white allies mentioned in the project. So my first hero is Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull was a native Sioux warrior, and in certain native tribes, you're given 2 names in your lifetime. So you have your first name and then your final name that you're given once you've had like something kind of impact your life and how you had that name given to you. So Sitting Bull, at a young age, he was given this name because he was fighting sorry, I can really see.
Screen in front of you.
Yeah. So he was trying to fight against his like opposing team, I would say, like of another tribe, and he him like stabbed him with a stick and stuff, and so they gave him the noble name of Sitting Bull. So what he is known for, and in the pictures you can see how powerful like he looks, like you can just tell he's very serious in what he kind of represents. So he was a fighter in the Battle of Little Bighorn, and he fought against white settlers. During the time, it was kind of hard because they were being invaded, and the sorry, I'm blanking. The white settlers were coming, and he needed his tribe, because he is Sioux as well. And he gathered them and led them 300 plus men against them, winning the battle. So in the picture, I just saw it like, in my perspective at least, he looks almost tough and that he can be shaken. So one of his famous quotes was, "If we die fighting for our rights." And actually by his side was Crazy Horse. So Crazy Horse also, his first name was Curly because he wasn't very, like, he didn't look like any other natives. He had more lighter skin tone and he had curly hair, which majority have, well, not majority, but some have very straight hair. So he was given the name Curly. Alongside Sitting Bull, while Sitting Bull was kind of ensuring the safety of the women and children of the time, Crazy Horse led the men against Custer and ended up winning the battle. He was betrayed when his final stage happened, and they would say that the interpreter of, because he can't speak English, so his interpreter would lie, and he would say that, oh, he won't stop until all white men are dead, which wasn't true. He really didn't say anything like that at all. He was against any form of fighting towards the Nez Perce tribe. So when he found this out, he wanted to stop any negotiations with the reservation that he was staying at. So he was returning to camp the next day, and he told them that he wants to speak with the military. So he went, but they didn't lead him to the military, they led him to a cell. He was incarcerated. So then he saw that the betrayal was happening. He took his knife, and then he held it against one of the officers' necks and he was like, "Let me go." One of the officers was trying to retaliate and ended up killing Crazy Horse just to protect the other officer. In this picture, I could see like he's very kind of like nothing phases him. And I guess he shows that also in battle when he was leading those men. So I could see that that's how they kind of set up the photos, that he's very straight, tall, and he's not phased. Fred Hampton. So I don't know if you're familiar with Fred Hampton.
We just watched a video that he was in today when we were learning about the Black
That's
Panther
great.
Party.
Leader of the Black Panther Party. So he started this group called the Rainbow Coalition, and it was to help fight against any discrimination, racism, subsettling, any form, just anything really, and like poverty, all of this, just for good causes. So this incorporated Latino groups like the Young Lords and white lower class folk like the Young Patriots. So it was called the Rainbow Coalition because it was like a lot, like just not only Black people, but multiple passing ethnic and racial backgrounds. So oh, okay. So in my pictures, I wanted to show like how he's always, I guess, in his activism, just like he's constantly just fighting and arguing, and you can see how he's like having a protest and he's, you know, talking with strong voice, and you can tell even in the last picture, like he's talking with a strong voice just to gather up his, like, to excite his members as well. So Fred Hampton, he was under the radar of J. Edgar Hoover. At the time, they were trying to find the Black Messiah. So they decided to raid one of the headquarters of the Black Panther Party, and they ended up killing Fred Hampton, which sucked because it left his girlfriend at the time 8 months pregnant with his son. And she was charged with open fire against, like, attempted murder of the police. So with these pictures, I just wanted to show how radical and how passionate he was during his time. And again, one of his famous quotes were, "The Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anyone says. We don't think fighting fire with fire is best. We think fighting fire with water is better." Malcolm X. Malcolm X was more like, he also was part of the Black Panther Party as well. And I'm so sorry. What? Sorry, I'm blanking. So Malcolm X, his original name was Malcolm Little, but when he turned 21, due to his traumatic childhood, he got into petty theft and like petty crimes and stuff. So he was taken to prison, where he met the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. He was the leader of Nation of Islam. Nation of Islam was a Black nationalist group that fought against any sort of racism, segregation, all of that, just to have Black power, and which, would try and, exaggerate that just so that it would get into the minds of people who didn't really understand. So when Malcolm X was finally taught these things, he decided, I really agree with what this man is saying, or his teachings. So he decided to change his surname from Little to X to show that he he's giving up his slave name. As you can tell in the pictures, he's very radical, more radical than Martin Luther King, which at the time, him and Dr. King didn't butt heads like crazy, but they were at odds because Malcolm X, yes, they were fighting for the same reason, but he was more whatever means necessary, and Dr. King was very more peaceful. So again, in his pictures, you can see how he'll do whatever it takes to have the justice that he wants. So Malcolm X, after a time, he decided to not follow Nation of Islam anymore because the teachings became corrupt. So he was just like, you're not doing what you said in the beginning and you're kind of using it to your own advantage. So he decided to leave, which didn't help his case because he also became a suspect of them as well, kind of having them under his radar as well. So he took a trip to Mecca, which is, Mecca. So there he saw more brotherhood and the best explanation of brotherhood that he'd ever seen in his lifetime. He changed his life. And he ended up changing his name. So you can see where it says, Eliha Malik El Shabazz. So Malcolm X, when he came back with that new name, he decided to start a new organization from Afro Unity. So one day he was, in his headquarters and also under the radar of J. Edgar Hoover, because again, looking for the Black Messiah, they killed him. But he wasn't killed by J. Edgar Hoover. He was killed by one of his older members of the Nation of Islam. Again, very radical. Shakur. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Shakur, but she's actually the godmother of Tupac.
Yeah.
Tupac Shakur, during the 90s rap star. So Shakur was a member of the Black Liberation Army. They were like a Black nationalist group who really they were also very radical, and they really liked getting their point across. And she was a part of the Black Panther Party for a while, but she didn't like how macho they were, and she's got like you really don't understand not the idea, but you don't understand anything about the U.S. Black history. So she decided to leave and join Liberation. So Sada Shakur, she was basically known for, one day she was pulled over at a turnpike in New Jersey, and there were two officers at the time. So she was driving with her, I believe, mom of Tupac, and one of her comrades, Akoli, I think. So they were pulled over because they had a faulty tail light. It wasn't true, but the officer claimed, he literally said verbatim, that he was suspicious of the women because, one, they were Black, and two, because they had a Vermont plate in New Jersey. So he took out his firearm and he pointed it against them. He was like, "Put your hands up," but they complied. They weren't giving him any resistance until he shot at Asada, and Asada was shot in the arm and the back. Everything escalated super quickly, and finally, she saw that Zalid Shakur, which is her Tupac's mother, was dead. And she was like, "Oh my goodness." So she acted very quickly, and she ended up killing Officer Forrester. Now, at the time, Officer Harper, who killed Shakur, he did confess, but because of God knows what, Assata Shakur was charged with both murders from the officer and from her fellow. So her and a colleague. So they were both charged with 33 years to prison. But she only served 6.5 years and escaped. And she ended up fleeing to Cuba. 2017, Donald Trump decided to announce to Cuba that they couldn't hold any felons from the US. If they were considered a felon in the US, they had to return home. But Cuba decided to say no, and they refused to give back Assad Shakur, which kind of like added on to her legacy because it just shows how powerful the woman she was. So in this photo, you can see that she's wanted, and even till this day, she's still wanted. So I just wanted to show how, I guess, how powerful the woman she was in the photo, like you can tell, but she's also very peaceful as well. So she won't do anything until, I guess, agitated.
It's me, because I was touching it.
It's totally fine. Emilio Zapata. Emiliano was a Chicano revolutionary, which Chicano is more, the original name of Mexico was Mexica, but it was changed. And so when you say Chicano, is more, he was a native of Mexican land. Zapata, he started a protest with his neighbors against white settlers who wanted to overtake the land. And so he decided to lead a revolution. And their land was taken by force, which wasn't right. So he started a reformation to like get their land back. And he had people by his side. He had enough people. And he ended up taking back the land and giving it back to the native ejidos. He was also involved in like the defeat of General Victoriano Huerta, and after he assassinated Madero, which was someone that took their land. So during the time Zapata was betrayed, like when he finally meets his end, he was betrayed and he was ambushed and killed. And this was under the command that the United States assumed was president, which was Carranza. So in the picture, you can see how he's leading and he's very, again, serious with what he wants. So that's one of the things that I really thought was a good perspective. Harriet Beecher Stowe. So Harriet Beecher Stowe is one of the white allies I was talking about. She had a great heart. Her life changed when she lost her son during an epidemic. And in that moment, she felt sorrow and empathy for Black mothers who had been enslaved at the time because their children had been sold away. So because of that, she decided to write Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin was a story that really painted a great picture of what women have to, well, not only women, but what slaves have to go through. And it angered the South like crazy because it's like, no, that's just how it is. But in reality, no, that just sucks. And you're being horrible. But because she wrote this, a lot of people in the North, allies of anti-slavery, decided to rise up as well and write more works that kind of complemented her work. So when she found out that the Act of 1850 was an act to like have northern slaves that escaped to the north come back, she was angry, and she decided to start use her fame to start a petition to stop slavery. So whenever she became famous, she toured and she went to like nationwide. And so she decided to use the money that she earned from her tourings to put to use it as like donations towards anti-slavery causes. Because of her, yeah, she was part of the reason why they started the Hartford Art School, which also became part of Hartford University.
I'm sorry.
Fine.
Keep going.
I feel like in the picture you can see that she was a very soft woman, and that complements her empathy for Black mothers that were enslaved. John Brown, another white advocate. He was an advocate for anti-slavery, and it really showed when he took his sons at the time and to Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, and he was responsible for bleeding Kansas. This happened where he killed 5 pro-slavery men and with his sons, and he sorry. So during the time, he decided to assemble abolitionists, and so he gathered enough people, and he overthrew forces of Colonel Robert E. Lee from the South. He was charged with treason for doing such things, and he was considered a martyr for people who were anti-slavery for what he did, because he died for, right reasons. Because the abolitionists from the North were so moved by this, it led to more things that included anti-slavery intentions and kind of conducted the American Civil War. Queen of Menorias. She is very brave for a woman. No, as a woman, she's very brave. During the time of Queen of Menorias, it was normal to have women rule, because just as she was ruling in Kush, Cleopatra was ruling in Egypt. She had done something that not a lot of men could do in her time, and she pushed back in a Roman invasion. The Romans were very strong and fierce, but she rallied her men and fought alongside them, and she fought against them, also ending up enslaving the Romans as well. 30,000 soldiers from the kingdom of Kush fought the Roman invaders, who, by the way, did not just come for only them. They came just from Egypt as well, so they were planning to come get them next. The Romans at the time invaded and took it upon themselves to force the people to pay taxes. So Queen of Menorias, because of her noble act and how brave she was, her legacy lived on, and not only was the kingdom of Kush, it weakened, and eventually it did fall under Roman rule, but because during her time of reign, she did have the courage to fight against and resist the Romans. Her legacy lived on. She's a very strong woman. And these are my sources. And that's it.
Questions for Jasmine?
Okay.
I have a question. Have you ever thought of taking
Actually,
You know, anyone really? Because it seems like you have a great sense of humor.
oh, well, I do love, I have a passion for photography. I just enjoy it. And my mentor, Tibere Jade, she's offered to kind of help me like learn and I guess exercise my, not strength, it's not really a strength, but exercise my my passion for it. So starting the summer, I'm going to be taking notes from her. And yes, so
Yay for family.
yeah.
Really nice job, Jasmine. This was a nice little history lesson that I enjoyed. I'm curious, what did you learn about yourself as a learner doing a capstone project?
So during the time, I think that what I learned about myself was I'm more interested about the story behind things than the what's been told. I just want to know exactly what happened. So I'll look at different sources and I'll cross-reference things. So I guess you could say I'm hungry for more as a learner.
That's great. Yes, that is wonderful. Well, great job. Congratulations.
Learned a lot. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
I'm gonna just pause the recording for you. All right, today we have Franny Pelphrey's capstone presentation. Franny, all yours. Go ahead.
I love 80s movies. Why this project? The first one is my Ali Sheedy costume. The second one is my I would have picked Ducky sweatshirt. The third one, I don't know what that. Oh, the third one is my art project I made during the shutdown. And then the third one is my Ferris Bueller bathrobe. Got it. Teen movies before the 80s. Back when teen life was fun and all singing and dancing.
That's a game for me and you now. Give it a whirl.
That's better. In 1977, John Travolta was, you probably don't know who he is. John Travolta was the bridge to youth. From Al Pacino to Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver.
Want the video to play?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, you might want to sit here.
Yeah.
Gets my exercise.
In 1978, 3 teen movies were all about nostalgia. Animal House, American Graffiti, and Grease. Usually, teens were in the movies, but not the focus. That's Ordinary People. So that's Taps, and the other one is Ordinary People. And Timothy Hutton won an Academy for Ordinary People. The 80s movie that changed everything. Fast Times at Richmond High. Next slide. Oh, Salmon Fell Rider went undercover as a high school student. First movie that focused on the villains. No wardrobe or costume. The actor wore their own clothes. Yellow Silence. After Fast Times, everyone wanted to see it. My favorite actor in this movie was Rob Lowe. We all love Rob Lowe. Important to movies reflecting the 80s. Let's keep it this. Joel wanted to get rich quick, success, and independence. That is Tom Cruise. Matthew, I don't know how to say it.
Braddock.
Thanks. Was a computer. Was a computer hacking team. President Ronald Reagan saw the movie and created the first anti-hacking law. His red dawn was about 2 soldiers. Say anything. Lloyd wanted a girl and he didn't care about the future. John Hughes in the backpack. John Hughes. Family was important to me. Teen dating lives with the plots were all about teenagers.
So yeah, Rob Lowe, John Nelson, Johnny Moore, Ellie Sheedy, Amelia Lester, Anthony Michael Hall, and Molly Ringwald. 60 candles. Turning 16 is a big deal in her family.
You can eat your carrots when you get home. That's it? You don't have anything else to say to me today? What would you like me to say, Snake? You don't miss the thought. Have a good day.
The Breakfast Club. John used lunch to show everyone's personalities and
What's that? Sushi?
right.
You won't accept it. That's not good enough. You're gonna eat that. I don't know. I can read. Indian J, the crust. Well done. It's a very interesting. All the food groups represented. Did your mom marry Mr. Roger?
This is Ferris Bueller's Day Off, my favorite, but you all probably knew that already. So, high school is the best time, but nobody wants to go to high school, especially me.
We have to go to school tomorrow, Brittany.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Then when you bent over, moaning and wailing, you get it. It's a little childish and stupid, but then so is this. Life goes pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you can miss it. I do have a test for that.
Oh no, this is the Karate Kid part. I'm sorry. Karate Kid part. Danny, this one's for you. did it better than Daniel. I know. Teachers as bad guys.
Learning about Tutor, nothing to do. This is only wrong Jesus found here. You're causing a major disturbance of my time. I've been thinking about this. If I hear all of this, you won't make it our time.
You're not doing the prank you did there.
No, I'm trying to get to this left video. It's a script. That's it.
My shorts.
John Bender's my spirit animal.
One more, right? Hold on, quick.
There's not so many times we can hear that.
You just, yeah, it's good.
I think I skipped one. Oh my God. Okay, hold on.
This is Back to the Future. That's, I don't know. Thanks. Going back to the
Never has there been a more exciting time to be alive. A time of rousing wonder and heroic achievement. As they said in the film, Back to the Future, where are we going? We don't need roads.
In 2019, we saw roads and stabilities. And one more this one. Questions and answers time. And opinions. The Karate Kid.
What makes the Karate Kid the best?
Most of the acting is great. There's only one bad actor though. His name is William Zabka. We don't talk about William. Any more questions? Oh, sure.
Who is your favorite character in the Breakfast Club and why?
Johnny Bender.
Oh God.
And why?
And why?
Why?
Because he's funny. Any more?
I have a question.
She has us.
If you could be any character in the 80s movie, which character would you want to be?
Johnny Lawrence.
And who's Johnny Lawrence?
He's from the Karate Kid and he beats people up. Yeah.
He's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Just misunderstood.
True. The new TV show says otherwise.
I actually never seen the TV show.
Your brother's calling you out. All right, I have a question.
Yeah.
What did you learn about yourself as a learner by doing a capstone project? What did you learn about yourself learning about things?
I've seen way less movies than I should have. Mom, any questions from you?
All that.
Do it.
Who of all of these team people, who became the most successful?
Really? Huh? Sean Penn, my homie Sean Penn. Even though I said I liked him, William Zabka actually became the least successful because nobody knows him anymore.
Francis, what would you rank as your top 3 movies?
God. This is pressure. Ferris Bueller's number 3. The Outsiders is number 2. And The Karate Kid is number 1. I'm a Ralph Macchio fan, as you guys can see. Yeah.
Mrs. Phillips told me The Breakfast Club used to be your favorite.
It's number 4.
Okay,
It's up there.
it's up there, still high.
Yeah.
Brandy, do you notice differences and similarities or not
Not
between the
really.
teens in the 80s?
Hey, it's the 80s.
And the teens today, really nothing?
Hopefully my dad won't have any questions.
I think Claudia has a question.
Claudia, what's your question?
Well, first off, I have a comment. Ralph Macchio is better than Rob Lowe in Outsiders. Number 2, though it's not an 80s movie, do you like Karate Kid or Cobra Kai better?
At least I'm trying to be honest. I actually like Cobra Kai better because the boys are much cuter. Cough, 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 Dimitri.
Ralph Macchio is cuter than all of them, Franny.
Fake news.
What's the difference between the 80s teen movies and today? Do you like Cobra Kai better with your generation? What do you think is the big difference?
I don't know. Seriously, Dad, do you have any questions?
No, but I do want to tell you how proud I am of you, and that was a wonderful.
Don't
wonderful
embarrass me.
presentation. And I love you.
And we have one more slide.
Oh.
Hi, Ralph.
One more slide, Franny. There you go.
Special thanks from Franny Girl to Mom and Mrs. Hirsch.
Right. Now.
Pretty.
All right, so thank you all for coming, and this is Chase Tibere's capstone presentation.
Hello, and thank you to the many people who have come out to take the time out of their day to watch my presentation. This is the inner workings of the pathology lab. So what is pathology? Pathology is defined as the science of the causes and effects of diseases. Now, I'm not going to come out and say that there's so much more to it than that, because there's not, but there is actually some depth to the field. Pathology is a very applied science. People have diseases, pathologists are there to learn about said diseases. But the field is put into practice in 2 different ways: diagnosis and treatment. I spent about 6 months interning in the Braddock Lab of Yale University. Which focuses on enzyme therapy. While a large portion of academia is devoted to diagnosis and just telling people that they are sick and what they have, the Braddock Lab actually tries to do something about it. It is a very small lab with only 3 scientists under contract, plus a couple of Yale undergrads who come in. I spent my time shadowing Ethan Lester, a recent graduate of Yale University who will be starting medical school next semester. During my stretch in the lab, I was surrounded by some of the most brilliant people I have ever met, which is important because due to the size, the workload is extremely high for each member. One word that would perfectly characterize the lab is fluidity. In my experience with Ethan, we were tackling 2 or 3 projects at once. And these weren't just menial tasks. They were trying to find the first effective treatment for diseases that have plagued humans for centuries. Science cannot be done passively, which is why the ability to shift focus between projects is one of the most important qualities for smaller labs. So how does the lab actually function? Unsurprisingly, we use the scientific method. It all starts with an initial idea and a hypothesis. We first find a monogenic disease. We then research the pathogenesis and look for any significant biomarkers. Most of the time, our idea is to just supplement the deficient gene with the protein it should produce. The gene that produces ENPP1 isn't working in the body. Well, let's make some ENPP1, inject in the patient, and see what happens. Obviously, it is never that simple, but you get the idea. Sometimes, though, we have to get creative and think like scientists and actually have to find another enzyme to carry out the function. Usually, Ethan would come to me saying he thinks he could treat this disease using this enzyme. I'd spend the next 2 days sifting through dozens of articles and come back with about 30 highlighted pages of scientific literature just to say to him and explain why he was right all along. Now with the idea, we have to start the experiment. I will admit, this part of the process takes an advanced knowledge of biology and organic chemistry that I unfortunately do not possess. So I was never really that involved in it, although I do have some experience mostly from watching what was going on around me. To actually produce the enzyme, we grow Chinese hamster ovary cells. We use CHO cells because they are easy to use mammalian cells that produce enzymes that function in both humans and mice. All of the proteins we work with are extracellular, meaning that they are naturally excreted into cell media. This means we don't have to do much to extract the enzyme from the cell itself. From there, it's just a matter of concentrating the media into just the desired enzyme. We run the media through a machine with a series of tubes coated in resin. The resin is specifically designed so that the enzyme attaches to it. We then run a series of strong acids and bases through the tubes to wash everything out. Our final step is to use an elution buffer to detach the protein from the resin. We end up with a fairly concentrated drug that we could use on the mice. To begin testing, we need the mice themselves. We order knockout mice that are missing the gene to model the human disease. These mice are bred in the mouse room with each other and other wild-type mice, so we could get heterozygous, homozygous knockout, and homozygous wild-type mice. We have to genotype every mouse by punching its ears or clipping its toes, spinning down the tissue, and running an assay on every sample. Now that we have mice from each group, we have to design the experiment. We use 6 groups: undosed heterozygous knockouts and wild-type, and dosed heterozygous knockouts and wild-type. We have the Yale Animal Resources Center give food and water to our mice and also regularly dose them with our drug. Every week, for every experiment, we go to the mouse room and weigh every individual mouse so we could track its change in weight. This is a crucial marker. We also note down any visible symptoms so we could track their progression. This is important to not only monitor how the knockout mice deteriorate, but to also look at the adverse effects of dosing. For example, in one experiment, there was a concern that dosed mice were becoming hydrocephalic. This means that excess fluid was going to their brain. Obviously, in humans, this would be a serious problem. And had this actually been the case, we would have to either alter the drug or the dose itself. Most of our studies use death as an endpoint, so they run for months. The last step, once the mouse dies or is at least nearing death, is to dissect the mice and take more serious measurements. We start by drawing blood, which we spin down to just the plasma. The plasma is tested for the concentration of biomarkers such as pyrophosphate. We dissect the mouse and isolate organs such as the kidneys and aorta. This was the part I found most interesting during my whole time in the lab. I didn't include any pictures for your own sake, but just know every part of the body is harvested and carefully studied. all you're left with is literally a spine and a couple of paws. The organs are then imaged using a micro CT scan to usually check for any calcifications, while the femur and tibia are tested for strength and the maximum load that they could bear. The whole thing is a very long and very tedious process, but it is that precision that validates whether or not the drug actually helped. So now that we know how the lab works, I want to talk about what I focused on during my time. The project I was invested in most was in a study focused on Aicardi-Goutieres syndrome. AGS is an extremely rare neurological disease with only 400 reported cases. We were focusing on a model caused by a knockout in the TREX1 gene. It produces an intracellular protein, meaning that it stays within the cytosol and is not excreted. The function of the enzyme is to trim DNA in the cytosol. When the gene doesn't work and these DNA fragments are loose, it triggers the STING pathway. This then triggers an inflammatory response that affects the brain. The disease is truly awful, and it causes uncontrollable jerking known as dystonia, poor head control, loss of mobility, and severe intellectual impairment. Patients usually die by their tween years. Faced with this seemingly unsolvable problem, we had to think outside the box. Ethan came to me with the idea of using DNase, and I'll admit, at first, I really did not think it was going to work, as DNase has only been linked with the interferonopathy for lupus and not that of AGS. But I figured it was worth a shot and should definitely be pursued. An interferonopathy is a pathway that is cyclically triggered, causing chronic inflammatory responses. Fun fact, the term interferonopathy was actually coined to link a common process between AGS and lupus. Lupus research has found that the disease occurs when the body is lacking DNase. Your body deals with some infections by entrapping viruses or bacteria with neutrophil extracellular traps made up of DNA. These neutrophils undergo mitosis and explode, destroying the virus and leaving behind any excess DNA. DNase is an enzyme that then degrades these loose fragments. When there isn't enough DNase available in the body, then it will stay loose. But obviously, your body has to react to anything irregular. So it undergoes more mitosis to destroy the DNA, which it treats as a virus, leaving even more DNA behind. This cycle goes on, so you always have an inflammatory response in the body. The lab had run another study using a DNA supplement to treat lupus, and it appeared to be effective. So our thought process was we have to get rid of the DNA somehow, some way. If we can stop the STING process from even starting, then the disease can't persist. With lupus, the disease starts outside of the cell, which makes things a lot easier because we know that DNase can work extracellularly. We couldn't just use TREX1 for two reasons. First, we had no way of isolating the drug because it is stuck in the cell and not the media. We can't put whole cells through the purification machine and expect it to work. Secondly, even if we did possess TREX1, we had no sure way of getting it within the cell with an enzyme injection. Our first thought was maybe venturing into gene therapy. The idea that if our drug can't get in the cell, why don't we just help the genome and use a vector to integrate TREX1? This once again seems so easy in theory, but we couldn't pursue it. Most importantly is the cost. Each individual vector costs $2,000 to acquire. And any experiment that we would run requires at least 40 mice. And then we would have to also go through at least a few trials to alter dosing and the drug itself, because there is no chance that we would get it right on the first try. The total cost of the experiment would be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that the lab just does not have to allocate. Any proposal of gene therapy would have also been shut down from the start by Dr. Braddock, who isn't a big supporter of the science. The problem with vectors is they are a one-time shot. With monthly enzyme injections, if it goes wrong, or if the dose is wrong, it can just be adjusted the next time that you need a dose. If you incorrectly dose gene therapy, then it's a shame because your genome is permanently altered. Gene therapy at this stage is also extremely dangerous because of its lack of specificity. Vectors have the potential to add to the genome in both non-targeted cells and even in targeted cells. They could increase the gene too much. Either way, this will cause cancer to develop in patients. There is only one FDA-approved gene therapy, and even that has serious toxic side effects. It's just that any side effect is worth it when the alternative is infantile death. Now, that doesn't mean a vector isn't a possible solution for AGS in the future. It just wasn't viable for the lab. After ruling out gene therapy, we figured DNase was our only chance. We were basically just hoping that we could get lucky and DNase would find its way into the cell. It was far from a surefire plan. In fact, it boils down to literally throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what manages to stick. But science is very complicated, and something that on paper seems like a solid solution will fail in vivo most of the time. And a somewhat reasonable Hail Mary attempt at a breakthrough has a relatively good chance of working. Unfortunately, I had to leave the lab in the middle of this project, so I didn't get to watch our crazy theory come to fruition. But the results are apparently looking promising thus far. So why do people actually get involved in pathology? Let me give you a story. Just the other day, I was watching the news, and a story about a girl from Glastonbury came on who had recently passed away from AGS. I watched her family talk about the life she could never live, and it was truly heartbreaking to me. You know, for the diseases we work with, these kids are just born to die. They really have no chance at survival. And even if they are one of the lucky ones, I wouldn't even consider their existence to be living. They are usually in extreme pain with such limited cognitive ability that they are barely functioning. And I say this not out of disrespect for the patients, but rather because I care so much that I want to see them enjoy their lives. The problem is so few people really care. I'll be the first to tell you that 1 year ago today, I had absolutely no clue what AGS was. And that's the problem. Nobody knows. And no drug companies are willing to take the risk to treat it because it is so rare and so complicated. To be not only one of the few people who know what these kids go through on a daily basis, but to actually try to help is what makes this work unbelievably rewarding. There is no guarantee that any of these trials will ever pan out, but even the slimmest chance to be part of the group that solves the unsolvable problems of modern medicine pushes me and pushes my lab mates to put so much time into these experiments. The thought of walking up to that poor girl's family and saying, I understand what you're going through. And while I might not be able to actually do anything about it, at least I'll try. That's all the motivation necessary for me. So what is the future of pathology? Unfortunately, it seems to be a very bleak one. This right here is a graph of NIH appropriations over the past 2 decades. And as you can see, when adjusted for inflation, the field is truly collapsing. And it's not just a small decrease, it is very, very significant. Funding is decreasing at an alarming rate. And the biggest issue for smaller labs is money, most of which comes from these NIH grants. Even worse, according to Dr. Braddock, the top 10% of labs are receiving 50% of the funding. This causes the other 90% to have to secure their own money. And in a field where breakthroughs are so few and far between, investors aren't so keen on writing checks. With the way things are going in the upcoming decades, only the larger labs and pharmaceutical companies will be able to survive. It will be an utterly untimely death to an industry that is so important to humanity. As you can see, it is only the smaller labs that are willing to actually help with these unknown diseases. If they cease to exist, then the patients will just be left to die. It is a reality that nobody wants to accept. But when nobody knows that the reality exists, nothing can change. Thank you. Here are citations.
Nice job, Chase. Questions?
Yeah, so where is this going? What's going to replace pathology? How is that?
not what's going to replace pathology as a field, but just only larger companies that would make profit would be able to survive. So only either, so there's basic research funding and then there's appropriated research funding. So for diseases like cancer or for something like COVID, when that happens, then the NIH will give grants for what it needs for the world. And then obviously pharmaceutical companies will only focus on very profitable diseases. And those will be able to survive because the money still does exist. The problem is smaller labs that already struggle with funding will then continue to lose more funding.
Have you guys talked or thought about a solution?
No,
No.
no, it's not really up to us. It's just a lot of, I mean, the only thing that a lab itself could do is secure its own funding, which the Braddock Lab does through investors and foundations and such. But a lot of the diseases that we work with have, 2,000 patients across the world. So there isn't so much money appropriated to actually helping them.
So Chase, how did you get involved with the Braddock Lab?
Dr. Braddock is actually my neighbor, and I showed an interest in chemistry. This started around like 8th grade, and I showed an interest in chemistry. Due to the age to actually be accepted into the lab, you had to be 16. So I turned 16 this past summer, and then I started working there.
And what was your hands-on experience? What were you doing?
I think the thing that I was most involved in was research. I did the majority of that for me and Ethan. And then although every project is unique, it's always a lot of the same steps. So running assays, I got good at doing that. And then like weaning mice, setting up breeding pairs, dosing them, that I all learned to do during my time. And then dissections, obviously.
That's pretty amazing. What was the part that you wished you could do the most that you didn't get to do?
I wouldn't say there was anything that I wouldn't say there was anything that actually went on that I wish I was able to do. I guess being able to work with the purification machine would have been something interesting to learn, but even that's just pretty tedious, and I would almost say I'm glad to not have to go through that process. But obviously, if I wanted to pursue this as a career, I would have to learn how to use it.
Right.
Yeah.
Other questions? What did you learn about yourself as a learner doing a capstone project?
I would say that this is one of my first chances for real hands-on learning, and I'd say I responded very well to that principle. And actually being able to, I came in with honestly no knowledge of pathology, but being able to work on it and being thrown into the field and having to do my own research just so that the lab could function, that really forced me to learn at an accelerated rate.
Yeah, what a great experience for you to learn about yourself as a learner, to be like, this is the kind of thing I want to do and how to make like your next steps in life like meaningful.
Yeah.
So do you think you'll be going into what kind of, I'm guessing science is what you'll be going into in a few years?
Science, and then at the time being, I plan on going pre-med.
Okay.
And I'll probably major in chemistry or biology, some sort of life science.
Very cool.
I just like to say how proud I am of you for personalizing what the patients are experiencing the diseases. It's what their life must be like, rather than just looking at it. So many scientists just look at the disease and they don't think about the person who is experiencing it behind the diagnosis. And that you thought about the whole impact, of what you were really, of what your reach could be. We would joke around sometimes because I'm in the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
And, even when talking about lupus, how many people are out there really suffering with lupus?
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm proud of how much you take.
Yeah. Well done, Chase. Well done, my friends. A good feeling.
Okay. All right. We now have Coco McCartan's capstone project. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Coco McCartan. I am a junior at Guilford High School, and I'm going to be presenting on argumentative strategies.
And I already messed you up.
You're good. Okay. So, oh, wait. I don't know if it's supposed to be too far. Okay.
We got this.
Okay. So first of all, why did I choose this project? Last year I was in honors English, and this year I'm in AP language, and I'm also enrolled in a law and youth course, and I'm planning on taking AP Lit next year. So I really like to share my opinions, and I also really like to hear other people's opinions because I feel like it makes me more educated and I can learn a lot of new things. When I joined Law and U, I learned that I could also defend my opinion, and I really liked that aspect as well, where I had an opinion that I wanted to share, and other people may have had different opinions, but I could still, even if I'm not convincing them, learn something else from their argument or even convince them of my argument. To research more about this idea of how I could win an argument and also what goes into making a successful argument, I worked with Mr. Pelphrey, who's my advisor, and he helped me to learn what should go into my presentation and how to organize it in a way that would really explain how to make an argument. I also worked with Mr. Monaco, and he was able to help me with his sophomore class. I was able to go in and share a presentation with them and see how they respond to different strategies, which ones do the best and which ones people gravitate towards. And I also interviewed Dr. Freeman, and he was able to give me his view based on someone who, even if he's not convincing Guilford constantly, he makes decisions and he has to convince Guilford of why he made these decisions. And he also just has a general speaking role in the town. So the basis of my capstone, wait for it. Okay, cool. Okay. So a good argument, what is it? And I thought of it as two parts, preparation and presentation. The preparation of it is the content of it, what goes into it, which strategies you're using, and how you craft the tone for your argument. And then the presentation of it is actually speaking it to the audience and how that impacts what your argument can be. So first, the preparation, what goes into the argument, and how you should craft something that can actually convince people. The first thing I looked at is your intent and your topic. Now, morality plays a big part in this, and we can see this in politics today. With the presidential election, both candidates were making insults, and they were sometimes personal, which, number one, had nothing to do with their argument. Number two, made them look a lot less credible because they were making petty insults, personal ones that had nothing to do with anything. And it also did not help their argument whatsoever because they weren't sharing any of their policies or really helping any of their audience. So the big part of morality is making a moral boundary where what are you going to say, and is this a personal argument or is it based on your opinion? If it's personal, then you have a less moral boundary, but if it's just professional and you're debating an opinion, you don't want to go personal because that's not going to help your credibility and it'll actually lose credibility. Another thing to focus on is your tone. A lot of what's going on today in current events is the pandemic, COVID, things about the Holocaust and slavery, and those are all very sensitive topics. If you're sitting there cracking jokes and making fun of different aspects of it, you're going to also lose credibility because it's a serious topic and you should not be joking about that. Similarly, if you have a less serious topic where it's something like school uniforms, school lunches, feel free to have a more lighthearted attitude because if it's completely serious, it doesn't really match the tone. It's less serious and you want to be able to entertain your audience still. Another thing with the current events is the relevancy, and we've seen this a lot with the mask mandates. And this is what Dr. Freeman was talking about. With mask mandates, we're a completely different place than we were 2 years ago. For example, 2 years ago, the CDC was urging people not to wear masks because we were in low supply of masks. Today, it's a very different scenario where we're not in low supply, and the CDC is still urging some people to be wearing their masks. Regardless of where you stand on the mask mandate, you have to make sure you're using relevant evidence. So if you're using evidence from 2 years ago, and you're saying, see, this is why we should be wearing masks. The CDC said we shouldn't be wearing masks. That's not relevant to your case, and it won't boost your credibility or your argument. This can be seen in a lot of primary sources where it may seem like they're good, but they're not actually very good at proving your point because they're, again, nowhere relevant to what you're trying to say. And it also makes you seem not very well informed since this data is old and not related to your idea. The next thing I looked at is refuting. Refuting can sometimes either be necessary for your argument if you're in some sort of a debate, or it might just help your argument. The thing I looked at is respect with your refuting. So this goes hand in hand with the morality of your argument, where first of all, my goal sometimes is to just learn about the other side. I'm not going to be able to do that if I'm just insulting them and I don't want to hear their argument and I just think I'm the only right one. You want to be respectful of the other side and really listen to what they're saying, because first of all, then you'll be able to craft an actual refute. And second of all, you may learn something and it actually may benefit you. However, you also do run the risk of a false equivalency, and is there always two sides? Again, with the current events, these debates about the Holocaust, where should we be teaching both sides, that the Holocaust actually exists. There's not two sides to that. Yes, the Holocaust did exist. You can't say, well, I see why you would think the Holocaust didn't exist, because that's insensitive and that's not a real point. You can't level the playing field where you're seeing and agreeing in a sort of way with their point, because once again, it's false equivalency. You don't have the same idea one of them is wrong. So although you do want to respect each side and you want to respect their opinion, if their opinion is wrong, you also don't want to be saying, well, I agree, and well, I see what you're saying, because you shouldn't be seeing what you're saying and you're validating something that shouldn't be validated. The next idea is what strategies should be going into your presentation, and this is something I also talked to Dr. Freeman about, because all high schoolers know about ethos, pathos, and logos, where ethos is an appeal to credibility, pathos is an appeal to emotion, and logos is an appeal to logic. And people want to put all of them into your slideshow or all of them into your argument, and sometimes that's not always a good idea. So with ethos, it can be very opinionated. If you're using a celebrity endorsement, for example, someone may not like that celebrity, and that'll hurt your argument. It's of course not, you don't always know if it's gonna hurt your argument, because maybe everyone will like your celebrity. But if you're using someone super controversial, it's not gonna help your argument, and there is always the risk that people won't agree with that. With pathos, you can't deny a story. If someone is sharing a personal experience and they're really putting their heart out there, you can't deny that it happened to them. It did happen to them. Maybe you don't agree, or maybe you still agree with the opinion, but it did happen to them and you can't deny that. With logos, there's the idea of confirmation bias, where you can be putting facts out, but people might bend those facts to agree with their argument. So you have to make sure your facts are very clear and very one-sided, else you run the risk of people changing up your facts. With ethos, another thing is it takes time. It takes time to build your credibility. Even if you're not using a celebrity endorsement, there's still a lot that has to be done before you can prove your credibility. With politicians, for example, they can show a lot of what they've done on the campaign trail, or a lot of what they've done for different cities or different towns. But this takes time. It takes a lot for them to be able to share what they have done and their credibility. So with ethos, there's not an immediate sense of, well, this is my first campaign, but you guys can trust me. There's a lot of different stuff that goes into that. With pathos, there is more of an immediate relatability, where people may be able to immediately sympathize, or even if they haven't personally gone through that, they will be able to see that it is a personal experience and they will be able to relate to that in some sort of way. With logos, it can be very hard to understand, and the best way I can compare this to is when I went to the Grand Canyon for the first time, I couldn't necessarily wrap my mind around what was happening because it's so amazing and so breathtaking. Logos can have that same kind of effect, where if you're just spewing out statistics and facts, people might not respond to that as well as they would a story or even credibility. However, there are pros to ethos. You can form a relationship with your audience. If you're very credible, the audience will be able to trust you, and that'll help them to really listen to your point and really give them a chance to agree with you. With pathos, you do run the risk of sensationalizing and hyperbolizing. This is seen in the media a lot today, where someone can share a personal story and it's blasted all over the internet for views or for personal gain. And that's insensitive, and it can really hurt your credibility and your argument. With logos, it is a concrete fact. there is the risk of confirmation bias and that it's hard to understand. But Dr. Freeman was talking about how if you're in front of a financial board, then maybe it is really helpful because it is a fact and they're not really going to respond to a story. So a lot of this is all about the context of your argument and what you're trying to convey, because there are different ideas that you want to go more towards. So he was talking about how when he's presenting to students or parents, he likes to veer more towards pathos because they can understand that better, whereas logos, they wouldn't be able to understand it and it wouldn't help his argument. So when I presented these ideas and then I had this debate with the sophomore students, I was thinking who wins and what kind of preparation wins. And it is that it's the people that are prepared, the ones that can just speak more freely because they have all the information behind them. And people noticed that even though they were presenting to their opponents were able to recognize that they were prepared with all of their information and they were able to just be confident in what they had. So the next part is the presentation of your argument. And the presentation might not seem important, but someone could have the perfect argument and audience in their favor, a perfect refute, and still lose if their presentation isn't good. So I have this quote, and okay. So being in the right does not depend on having a loud voice. This has been seen everywhere in many different variations, but for my purposes, I actually disagree with this statement. So another example is in the classroom. When a teacher asks a question, someone may mumble the answer and they might be right, but someone else 2 seconds later may yell out the answer and they're also right, and the teacher will give them the credit because they're the ones that they heard. And this matters especially in an opinion-based idea where if someone hears you more and they actually can listen to you and you're confident about your idea, they're going to agree with you more because they can actually see where you're coming from. Confidence plays a big role in this, where being right may actually depend on just them hearing you and being able to listen. So in this video, this is How to Build Your Confidence by Brittany Packnett-Cunningham. She talks to this and how important confidence is in a debate. So after watching this video, I kind of thought of confidence as a first impression. So something like the cover of a book or a first date, a first meeting. So the cover of a book, if it's not colorful, if it's boring, I'm not going to pick up the book. I'm not going to read it. And even if it's judging by a book by its cover, I still agree with it. I'm not going to read it. And similarly, if it's a first date and it's boring and I don't really want to be there and it's uninteresting, I'm not going to continue the relationship. Confidence is the same thing. It allows you to speak to your audience instead of at your audience. So you're able to really form that connection with your audience, and that can help you. Oh, I think someone might have just joined. I saw something go up at the top.
Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, so confidence really helps elevate your argument to the next level, and this can be huge for actually speaking to your audience and having that relationship with them. So what she talked about in her presentation is, the idea that confidence, if knowledge,
Do you want the video to play?
No.
Okay.
If knowledge and resources were all that we needed, we wouldn't still be here. And I think this is a very good excerpt from her video because it talks about how knowledge and resources, the preparation aspect, are very important for sure. But if they were all that we needed, we would be a lot further and anyone can form a great argument. Presentation still does play a big role because confidence is the necessary spark before everything that follows. And that idea is that confidence really elevates your argument and it allows you to have that relationship with your audience. So the same thing from the last idea is, I'm getting, I don't know what I'm.
I got you.
Okay, back to, there we go. Okay, so in an interview, we can see this really take place. In an interview, if you're sitting there and you're confident and you're really confident in your abilities and you seem eager to be there, there's a much higher chance that they're going to hire you with more than if you're sulking or if you don't seem very interested in the job or you're unprepared. So that is a big part of presentation where you want to show your interest and be able to show that you are eager for the position. Same thing in a car dealership where it's all about power. If you are going in and you have a set price and you're confident in that you're not going to waver from the set price, then they're going to not give you a low offer. Whereas if you're going to take whatever you get and you're not really sure of what's happening, they're going to be able to scam you more and you're going to get a worse deal. Another thing that really spoke to me this year and after Pat Laurie came in is the presentations with Zoom, where confidence has a huge impact. So what I thought of is how a lot of the things that the teachers were talking when we were virtual, it's the same material and the same quizzes and the same tests, but people did a lot worse. And I think I can attribute that to the way that we were all on Zoom and there was no real connection between teachers and students. And that's a big part of learning, that connection. So when we have presentations over Zoom, even if people are still competent and they seem eager, there's still not that connection, and that's what presentation helps. It really helps set it over the edge, and it helps you speak to your audience, in that case, the students. So in a real life example, again, who wins? When I spoke to my sophomore class, another interesting thing that was said was the person that was passionate, and although they had the content to back that up, the person that was passionate and who really was eager to be there, they were the ones that won. Granted, they were on the debate team, so they really did know what they were doing, but I think that was still interesting because it shows that presentation still does have a huge impact on what's going on. So another example of this is the Kennedy versus Nixon debate in September of 1960. This was one of the first debates aired on television and also one of the first debates in the presidential campaign. So Kennedy and Nixon both had similar ideas, where Kennedy was a moderate Democrat and Nixon was a moderate Republican. And there was level playing field in the sense that neither of them was super favored to win. Neither of them was running for re-election, so no one had a great advantage over the other. But their presentations were completely different because Kennedy walked in and he got his makeup done so that when the bright lights were flashing, you wouldn't see him sweating all that much. And he also wore a very dark suit, which contrasted the background of the set, so he popped against that and you could really see him. Nixon, on the other hand, did not wear makeup because he did not want to wear makeup. And then you could really see his sweat. And granted, he was sick from the campaign trail, but I think even wearing makeup would have lessened that effect. He also wore a gray suit, which blended in with the background, so you really couldn't see what he was doing. And throughout the presentation, throughout the debate, he was looking up at the teleprompter where there was a clock, and that made him seem shifty-eyed and nervous. And all of these things coming together made Kennedy seem really confident and really eager to be there, and he seemed like the really much better candidate, whereas Nixon seemed nervous and he really wasn't prepared to be there, and maybe he didn't want to be president as much. Either way, even if they had similar ideas and maybe there wasn't one that was drastically better over the other, Kennedy still walked away more victorious because his presentation was so much better and people could trust him more. So I wanted to conclude with the idea that both of these concepts are very important. They work hand in hand with each other. If you have a great presentation and the best content and the best data, then you're still not going to win because no one's going to be able to hear it if your presentation isn't very good. They work hand in hand as well. If your presentation isn't going to be that great, if you don't have content backing you up, you can only really be confident if you have great content working with you. I also wanted to conclude by saying I really learned a lot from this experience, and I was able to employ this as I was working in Law and U with all these arguments that we were having, and I was able to learn more from other opinions, but I was also able to convince more people, which is always fun. And I was able to really notice a difference in what I was saying and how I got a response from that. So I found that really interesting, and I really had a great time making this presentation. And I also learned a lot more about how to present, which I'm really happy about. So thank you. That's it.
All right, questions for Hugo? Okay. All right, I have one question. Well, I actually have two questions. So I kind of know a little bit what you did going into the social studies classroom. How did you present that to the students? What did you present to them?
So I had a presentation similar to this one, but less about the confidence aspect because that came in more later. So a lot of what the preparation, it came directly off of that slideshow that I presented to them, and it was very short. It talked about your audience, who you're presenting to, and then also like the tone and the refuting and stuff like that. And it focused a lot more on context, the context of your argument, because I was talking about the World War II, and that was a big part of it. Like, you shouldn't be joking, and you have to make sure you're really sensitive about the situation. So I was able to present that to them, and then using the template, it was like a 3-day process. I formed little groups, and they were able to debate the sides. And the reason why I used the template of who won World War I is because neither side was better, and it was really more about their skill level than, oh, well, this side is obviously right, so we're just going to choose that side. So I did get mixed responses where it was pretty even who won. And I think that also showed that like it really depended on the groups and what level of skill that they put into it. So then after I presented it, that was more of like the how do you make an argument and what my capstone is about. And then they were able to just go and debate and do their debates and then figure out who won. And then we had a discussion over that, like, oh, well, who won and why? And a lot of them were more focused on, well, they had the better data and they researched more. But then that one kid was like, he was really passionate about this and he really seemed interested. So we were like, yeah, like actually your side does make more sense. And that's where it kind of started where, okay, well, the presentation also really matters in this scenario.
Yeah. My next question is, what did you learn about yourself as a learner doing this project?
I think that a lot of the stuff when I was mostly, because I joined Law and U semester 2, and I was mostly looking at it more towards like, what is the best way to like make an argument and just engage. But then I was really able to shift it more towards how can you engage your audience and actually like convince them. So I learned a lot more about that. And I also learned a lot more about like trying to listen more, and that sometimes I am very opinionated. I'm a very opinionated person, and that sometimes I have to just take a step back and listen to like what's happening. And one of the TED Talks I watched actually had a lot to say about that, where they were talking about like Thanksgiving dinner and how maybe the political opinion is completely different from what you're saying, but it's still relevant to like maybe some of your ideas, and you should listen to that and see what's happening. So I've been able to learn a lot more about, well, why do you think differently than me, rather than just you think differently than me? No. So I think that was really interesting, being able to listen to that and seeing why, instead of just it just is like that.
Stepping back into like doing a capstone, what's your like most positive takeaway from doing the capstone project?
I think definitely being able to present to the sophomores, because also that presentation was one of the first ones where I just had slideshows and I just had slides with like words instead of just like listing. And I was able to just present to them, and just, there was not a lot of pressure because it was my capstone and I didn't know these people really. So I was able to just do like a nice presentation and then just see the results of that and really speak to students, which I feel like helped me a lot in figuring out, because like Dr. Freeman was a very interesting example and a very interesting view, but then also like seeing the students, I think that was one of my favorite parts, and the interactive element of it, I thought that was really fun.
Any other questions? All right, nice job, Coco.
Thank you.
Right. Nice. All right, this is Riley Mullett, and this is her capstone presentation.
Okay, so for my capstone presentation, I talked about growing a peer tutoring program for high school students. So this is kind of the order that I'm going to talk about things in. So I'm just going to talk about the roots, like why I started this, the process, what it took to get to where it is now, what the current program looks like, the impact that it's had on our community, and then the impact that tutoring can have, and then kind of just reflect on my experience and what I learned and how I grew from it. And thank you all for coming to my presentation. Okay, so where did this idea come from? This is a picture of me and my sister doing online school back in the spring of 2020. She didn't know this would be in here, so you're welcome. So when COVID first started, it was really hard to convert to virtual learning. I know I didn't really feel like I got a lot of academic support, especially in the spring of 2020. There wasn't really any online learning. School kind of just went dark. So I was thinking about younger kids and the important lessons that were missed, especially in subjects like math, where it's like really crucial to like get all your basics down. So they essentially missed like a whole half a year. So this is like the actual measured impact on learning, not just what I observed, but what the statistics tell us. So the NWEA, which researches educational access, noticed that there was less than half the yearly gains in math and a 30% loss in reading. So they compared measurements from the end of 2020 with measurements from the end of the previous school year. And a lot of this was caused by unfinished learning, which is essentially what I was talking about, the entirety of the spring of 2020 being missed. So there was a big gap in students' learning. Okay, so this is the process that it took from April to 2020 till May, or I guess now June of 2022 of developing the program. So in April of 2022, I kind of came up with this idea. It was actually because my mom was on Zoom calls, and she works for the Guilford Foundation, and she would always see grandparents and their grandchildren would be like scurrying around in the back of the Zoom call and kind of like distracting everyone. And that's when I realized, like, not only was I not in school, but all these like younger children weren't in school and weren't learning. And so I went to my math teacher, Ms. Takarska, and I didn't even think that I needed to create anything, but I was more asking if there's like an opportunity for online tutoring, or if there was some online support being given, especially to younger students. And I found out that there wasn't. So we went to the administration and presented this idea, and they were super receptive. And so in April, May, and June of 2020, I went on a lot of Zoom calls with administration, and we worked out what an online tutoring program could look like. So we ended up creating a lot of the forms that would be used later to request a tutor, to volunteer to be a tutor, and then like the time log to log how many hours you tutored for. So that was all kind of laid, like the foundation was laid for the program, but it never actually went live because everyone kind of just pushed school aside and went right into summer. So then in September of 2022, one of my peers, Kira Stankiewicz, came to the administration with the same idea. I got it. Thank you. Sorry.
Keep going.
Okay. And she planned to do this for her CAS project. So I decided to partner with her and keep the program alive. There were a lot of liability issues with organizing virtual tutoring through the school. So we reached out to Guilford Youth and Family Services, and Mike Costco helped us do it through them, so that there's a waiver that had to be signed, and that way the school avoided a lot of liability issues. So by June of 2021, we had the high school, and we actually got Adams involved also, and everything was entirely virtual. So from requesting a tutor to volunteering to be a tutor, and then also all the tutoring was also done virtually. And then in the beginning of this year, we were super excited because we were able to have in-person tutoring. So we sent out all the forms again, and this time tutors were able to choose to meet with students either in person or virtually. And then by the end of 2022, we were actually sending tutors to Adams also in person. And we had a lot of successful high school pairings, and we had kind of figured out the best way to pair tutors more efficiently so that people weren't waiting a while to get the support they wanted. Okay, so this is what it looks like now, and I have the forms. So this is the tutor request form. So this gets sent out in a Naviance blast quarterly, and then also was sent out at the beginning of the school year to all students. So this is where they would put in their email, their name, school email, their grade, and then their subject they want tutoring in. And then we also had a form for tutors to apply to be a tutor. So you would put your name, your grade, if you want to tutor Adams or the high school, and then what subjects you felt comfortable tutoring in. And then all the information was compiled together to pair people that would be like the best matches. Do you know how to make it full screen? Thank you. So basically it's just a referral system. So the tutoring is still all independent, but the program just pairs them. Like I said, this year it could be virtual or in person. And we actually had a total of 51 tutors signed up by the end of the year, which is pretty impressive. Unfortunately, not everyone was able to be paired just because different like requests for academic support. But we ended up getting 22 pairs. At Adams, we have 3 people currently tutoring, but I think a total of 6 people have cycled through helping with their homework club. And we have over 100 reported hours of tutoring. That's just reported. Last week, we sent out a thing for community service hours to be filled out for what people had done. So that's all we've gotten so far, but there have been a lot more pairs. So I think a lot more will be reported in the future. This is kind of just a fun fact, but basically the entire program, especially up until this year, was run through email. So I was searching for paperwork for my capstone project, and I looked up tutoring in my inbox, and I realized that there are 254 emails with the word tutoring in them, which really made me realize where a lot of like the success, but also the frustration with things had come from, because there are definitely some major flaws with using email. A big thing that I talked to other tutors about was reaching out to students and kind of never hearing back from them because you're kind of lost in the jumble of emails that they get. But then it was also a strength because we can contact anyone in the district with email. So even if someone just filled out their name in the form, we could still contact them through email, and then they could also contact who they were assigned to tutor through email. And we were also able to reach out to Adams students through emails. So there are definitely some strengths, but also some challenges there. So for my expert interview, I was able to reach out to a peer. This is actually Olivia Weeks's cousin. He lives in Alabama, and he also started a tutoring program. He's a student at Mountain Brook High School in Alabama. And so there's a lot of major differences. He actually got paid for his tutoring, and his was just him. It was independent. He didn't use any volunteers. His students, he had a few first graders. His focus is mainly coding and mathematics. So especially with the coding, it was more about sparking an interest for younger students, whereas our high school program is more about just supporting the students in the subjects that they already are taking. The catalysts were a little bit different. So I started this program because I saw an increased academic need because of COVID, whereas Logan started his program because he was bored working as a grocery clerk, and he thought that he could better help his community in another way. And then same with for subjects. So the Guilford tutoring program, we offer tutoring in all subjects. Math is still by far the most requested, and I think there's by far the most success in mathematics tutoring. But we have had a lot of Spanish or language requests, and then we've had a few English requests. But Logan decides to just focus on math because he finds that he can be the most helpful in that area. And then for other similar local initiatives, Dwight Hall at Yale is a nonprofit organization at Yale that offered tutoring for the New Haven community, and then also the Fairhaven virtual tutoring program, which ended because it was just kind of for the duration of the weird online pandemic phase. But that consisted of Yale volunteers. I reached out, but I did not hear back from either of them. So this is about the impact of tutoring. So I use meta-analysis studies for all of these because statistical analysis of a large collection of results from individual studies. So this is kind of hard to see, but this compares the different types of tutoring essentially and their effectiveness. So the first one is for implementation. So substitute tutoring is much more effective than supplemental tutoring, which was good to hear because that's obviously what we did here. And then cross-age tutoring was significantly more effective than not cross-age tutoring. And we had obviously high school students going to Adams, which is cross-age, and then we also tried to pair people with students that were of a higher grade level, both so that they would be more comfortable with the tutor, and also because it's generally easier if they're in different grades. So this is more evidence that tutoring is effective. So a meta-analysis study of 65 published studies that use rigorous evaluation methods to evaluate high quality tutoring programs found positive, though modest, achievement effects across all the studies. And a British tutoring program involving 2,372 elementary and high school students who were tutored by trained parents and peers for an average of 8.6 weeks improved their reading comprehension 4.4 times the normal rate and word recognition 3.3 times the normal rate. 4 months after the end of tutoring, the average TD was still improving at twice the normal rate in both comprehension and word recognition. We didn't have a lot of English tutoring, but this does show that that can also be effective. And then this was the part of the research that I found the most interesting, was the positive effects of tutoring on the actual tutors. I had the opportunity to tutor an 8th grader last year, and then this year I tutored a student in pre-calc, a student in Algebra 1, and I got to tutor at Adams. And I agree with all these statistics, but I didn't necessarily expect there to be statistics on it. So achievement, there's a positive impact on achievement. 38 studies were examined, only 10 were statistically significant, but all of those favored positive growth in tutees' achievement or tutors' achievement. Their attitude towards the subject also showed positive effects. And then their self-concept was also positive, and actually 4 showed statistically significant positive impact. So then I took some quotes from tutors like in our own school. Some are positive and some are negative, but I think it's important to like show the range of experiences that people had. So the question was, I think, did you see any growth in the student you tutored? And like, what was your overall experience with tutoring? So this person said, yes, I saw improvement in the students' mathematical skills, as well as their study skills and motivation to learn. I learned that I enjoy helping and teaching other people in subjects that I feel strongly in. I also learned that it is easier for some students to hear instructions from other students, even after their teachers taught them, because the tutor was as a student in that class and knows it could be confusing. I thought that was a really good point, because I know sometimes teachers explain things in one way, but if you've already taken the class and you can even remember being told that specific instruction and having to kind of figure it out on your own, you can kind of have an extra tool to help that student. This is another positive one. Overall, I thought that the program was really effective. I know sometimes students do not want to talk to their teachers about certain topics, but will go to their peers. This program created that opportunity for their students. And then these are some criticisms that I completely agree with. So this person said, I think the program needs more commitment from both sides. I found it very hard to reach out to the person I was assigned to, and eventually I stopped contacting. I had a similar experience, even though I did eventually have 3 like successful tutoring experiences. There were multiple people who I reached out to and just never heard back from, and I would send follow-up after follow-up, and eventually you kind of have to give up that if they don't really want that support, you can't really force it on them. And then this person said at Adams, no students came, and the student I was supposed to tutor at THS never started a meeting with me, even though I would send her emails to check in on how she was doing. I also had a similar experience at Adams. There were some students that would show up, but very rarely would they actually want support from the tutors. A lot of times they're kind of just there to get their homework done. It was still nice to be there and be able to offer that support, but it was kind of rarely used. And then this was the last question on the survey, was if you would participate again. So 70% of tutors said that they would participate again, 20% were unsure, and 10% would not, which is obviously disappointing here. But I think it's promising that if we were to run this program again, which I intend to, 70% of people would come back, and then obviously you'd have new people who would be interested. So my experience as a tutor, I already kind of touched on this, but in 2021, I had the opportunity to tutor an 8th grade student in Algebra 1. This was entirely on Zoom, and I had a pretty positive experience. I downloaded a extension to my Chromebook where I was able to like use a whiteboard, and then I would just screen share. And she was super motivated, always like set up the meetings. So that was a very positive experience for me. And then in 2022, I tutored in pre-calc, and this time I was able to tutor in person. So we would meet at the library once a week. And then I also tutored at Adams, which like the students mentioned, the other students that tutored there mentioned, it was like a positive environment and stuff, but not always did the students really request help. So sometimes you felt a little useless. And then now I'm also tutoring someone, a sophomore in Algebra 1 or Algebra 2. So reflecting on my experience altogether, these are some of my takeaways. One was to take a gamble. The most challenging part of starting this process was that I was just kind of intimidated to bring the idea to anyone. And I just kind of thought like, oh, like, would this really go anywhere? Is this really something people need? Or am I just like being annoying or whatever? But I was super glad that I brought this to administration and they're so receptive of it. And then also that no impact is too small. Even though there were a lot of people who never heard back from students that requested a tutor, and sometimes like at Adams, there weren't like a lot of students that necessarily wanted support, just putting that resource out there can be really important. And for every like 5 failed pairings, there was probably at least 1 successful one. So that's still having a positive impact.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, and this is kind of along the same lines, but to stay determined, there are so many loopholes with like the liability thing. When we came back in the fall of 2021 or fall of 2020, I was kind of like disheartened from like how things had kind of ended in 2020 with like no clear ending, and we had put all the stuff together and it was never really used. But then when Kira came to the administration with that idea and we started like working on it again, we saw like just how much room there was to grow, and that like when the community supports something, it's like anything really is possible. Okay, so what's next? I plan to keep this project going into my senior year, and then I'm really hoping that next year I'll be able to get like an underclassman involved and they can take this over when I leave. I think it's really important to keep getting feedback from tutors, because obviously if it's not as effective as I hope, I want to be able to change it so it can be more effective. And I only obviously want to continue it if it's having like the desired impact. So thank you.
Questions for Riley?
I have a question.
Yeah, Mom.
Well, this was very interesting. So I learned a lot about your tutoring program. I didn't know.
Okay.
But have you thought about doing any kind of training for the tutors? Like, because you said you use the whiteboard on Zoom. Like, have you shared that knowledge with your tutors?
Yeah. So my sophomore year, last year, when we did do Guilford Youth and Family Services, as part of the liability, we were required to do a training. So we did an online training. Unfortunately, that was kind of before we had fully formed the program. So a lot of people attended that training and then were never paired with tutors. So I think that created additional frustration. And then at the high school, we did like a meeting at the beginning of the year to like first like kind of see how much interest there was in this. And we did like basic training. Obviously, if we don't want to like overstep, like I don't feel like I really like have the experience to like preach anything to people, and like everyone's experience is different. But we did like a little bit like informal training, but then a lot of people kind of only signed up after that. And since we are just like a referral service, like we don't want to like overstep our boundaries.
So first I want to say it's not really a question, but a thank you. Past 2 years, you guys probably know that Riley got the Charlotte Elgin Health Service Award in that department. And a big reason is because of your initiative, taking the initiative to do this service. And I know that you did come to me with the idea. It was really a hard one. Appreciate it. And I wonder, you talk about growing this. What vision do you have of maybe ways that we could continue to try to grow it?
Yeah, well, the one thing I think would be helpful would be getting Adams. So what happened was in 2021, Adams, it was individual student pairings. And I think that was a lot more effective than the like, I think it's called homework club, which is what kind of tutors were sent to kind of just be like floating. But I can't imagine that that's like the full extent of like the need for academic support at Adams. So I think that if we went back to individual student pairings at Adams, I think that would be really helpful. And then also we spoke about it this year, reaching out to Baldwin, but that kind of just never really occurred. So I also think that reaching out to Baldwin would be super helpful to kind of like get more schools involved, because especially if we're having like, so we had 51 tutors sign up, but we were only able to get 22 pairs just because of like the subjects people were able to tutor in and stuff. And so obviously the more like students we get, when there's definitely a demand out there, the more like people requesting tutors we get, the more people we can get involved like overall. So it would be positive.
So Riley, so kind of a follow-up to Mr. Karska's question, how are you going to advertise your program? Are you thinking about changing the ways other than just emailing kids?
Yeah, so this year we had like the Naviance blast sent out, and then Mrs. Ott sent
Did that go to parents?
Yeah, she sent it also to parents. What I would do next year would be to create a separate form for parents to fill out, because this year we had them fill out the same form as students. And I think that just got confusing because people would like put their own name instead of their kid's name. And then like or the parent would fill it up, but put their kid's email.
Mhm.
And that was a big thing this year was we wanted to start getting parent emails
Mhm.
because if the kid doesn't check their email, the parent might.
Yep.
So I would say to like keep the kid, like the student request system kind of different from the parent request.
Mhm.
Plus that way we know where it came from, so we know kind of who to target and what like the student's interest may be in academic support versus the parent
Mhm.
kind of thing.
And this is more just a suggestion for the suggestion box. I think you should talk to the schools about what you're doing, because I did not know that. I mean, I literally have you in class and you've told me about it because of Capstone, but like, just like, I don't even know if people know that this is happening and that they could refer their students to it. So
Yeah.
going to Adams and talking to the teachers, if Baldwin gets involved, like going to Baldwin and coming, and here to the high school and talking about
Yeah.
that it's even an option that they could refer kids to, I think would have like huge, huge impacts.
So, yeah, I think one pathway would be to go to the departments, like the other department. You would want to come to the department, they do the process. And that, then all the teachers see you and that would be.
Right, morning announcements or put them on the screens that they make announcements.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
that's
like
really-
just
yeah,
from
that'd
my
be
like
more-
my from the teacher perspective, I feel like if teachers knew that they could refer kids to
Yeah.
you, I think that would get you more people.
Okay, yeah.
And
no.
even can imagine that like parent teacher conferences being like, hey, your kid's struggling, here's this program that's being offered.
Yeah.
That's free.
Yeah.
Um,
No, that's good to know because like obviously I don't know, like I kind of assume teachers know, but then I do find myself explaining it to teachers a lot. So I'm like, obviously there's some disconnect that I like
Yeah.
misunderstood. So that's good to know.
if you did not tell me you were doing a capstone, because the first half of the year you didn't tell me about this at all.
Okay.
So I did not know. My next question is, what did you learn about yourself as a learner doing this capstone project?
I would say I learned that reflecting is very important because I kind of feel like I was kind of just like flying through it and like all the work for this was kind of just something like not brushed aside, but it was kind of just like I would do it and then be done. I never really reflect on like how like where can this go next year or things like how can this like grow. I was kind of just like I don't know, like kind of just going through it with like my eyes closed. Like I wasn't really like thinking about it. So I feel like the capstone, like the format of the capstone really forced me to reflect a lot more with like all the like questions and stuff. And then like the reflection paper at the end, I actually found super useful because I never really like collected my thoughts on everything.
Nice.
So I thought like that was probably the most valuable thing I took away from this was like the importance of reflecting and like this has set me up, I think, for like next year, creating a more successful program because I reflected on this one.
Any other questions for Ms. Riley? Very nicely done, Riley. Great job. All right, this is Maddie Nye, and she is here for her capstone presentation. Take it away, Mad.
Hi everyone, this is recorded. So my idea for this capstone project began when I started working at Just Hatched. Just Hatched is a local business in Guilford, and its purpose is to create thoughtful and special gifts for infants and toddlers ages newborn to 6 years. So because there was so much that was going into this project, I wanted to kind of push it into two parts. So the first part was the inners, which was basically the nitty gritty and everything that goes into working a small business, and the outers, which is the people in the community. So there's 4 parts to the inners of the name. First, it's production, which is capital income. So what is the business looking to make revenue-wise? Labor, who is making the merchandise, and are you gonna buy it from a vendor? Land and warehousing, which is, are you going to sell it or store it in a land or warehouse? Financing and insurances, how much are we spending and what do we need to insure? And then wholesale versus retail trade, which is how much are you buying it for the wholesale value and how much are you selling it for the retail value? Then there's the digital presence, which is the online storefront. Social media is a huge thing now for businesses, especially small businesses. So this includes having an online store, social media, online advertising, and online advertisements, which are broadcasted on social media. Then there's merchandising. Merchandising in the business world is known as the 4 Ps. product, placement, pricing, and promotion. Product, again, like I said, is what are you buying? How good of a quality is it? What vendor are you buying from? What brand are you buying from? And how much you're going to be selling it for. Placement is visual merchandising, which means the storefront or the online store, how is it looked? How is it presented to make the product sell better? Pricing, how are you going to price the merchandise and how are you going to make a profit from that? And then promotion, which can either be on social media or through advertisements. Then lastly, there's marketing, which is an online storefront, following on social media, local awareness, sales with coupons, and advertising. This also can include a customer following, which is like an email or notification system, so that they get updates on the most recent merchandise that's in and on the most recent sales. So personally, to Just Hatch, I wanted to focus a little bit on the inners of Just Hatch because that's where most of my research came from. So first there's the operations. We have a woman named Jackie, who's the manager of operations. She deals with all the paperwork, every issue, every product, every invoice, and everything going on with Shopify, which is our main production site, and it's where all of our inventory goes into. Then we have shipping and corporate. We have a woman named Trish who does that. So she packages all of the shipping, she makes all the labels, and then she ships everything out to FedEx. We do ship from Just Hatch anywhere around the nation. We don't ship out of the country, and depending on where you're shipping it to or how big the box is, we charge for that. And then we have merchandising and our digital presence. So this is run by Elisa. Elisa is our visual merchandiser, and she comes in every Wednesday to move new product in the store, change things, take pictures for the social media, and make the store look fresh. And then we have retails and sales, which is really what I do. Retail and sales is everything that goes into the storefront. This includes working with customers, working the register, wrapping, inventory, working with product, pricing, and then everything like the small details, filling in products, adding new merchandise, calling the companies, and stuff like that. So here's just a little breakdown of our website. So the first picture we see is just specifics that you can buy on our website. So typically on our online store, we only sell stuff that we have in the store all year round, which is our favorite footies or pacifiers, teethers, everything that we have in the store 24/7. But we also have this really cool feature where we make gift wagons ourselves. So we take themed gift, we take products in the store that kind of comes together nicely, and then we can sell it just as it is, so people don't really have to think about it. And then we also have Build a Wagon, and that's specific to if you want to send a wagon to someone, and it's the same thing, it's themed, and all of them have different price ranges, and you can buy them right off the website. And then the last is our corporate customer platform sign up. I'll talk a little bit more about the corporate customers, but really we have a corporate platform where corporate businesses can sign up here. They put in the name of the company, the phone, email, and any additional information, and we go through and we look at it and we consider them a corporate customer. If they become a customer, every single time that employee in that business has a baby, we send out the same gift to them with like a written note. And this is really great because corporate companies then advertise for us. And then we have like a huge platform. It was just from one company. The owner, Karen, one of her friends worked in a corporate company, and this idea started, and now we have over 20 plus corporate companies that we work with. So this is a few pictures of our social media platforms. Right now we are currently on Instagram and Facebook mainly, but we're thinking about starting a TikTok, possibly, and we're always open to expanding more. But just a little rundown of our social media. Usually we post about our sales. Every year we have one huge sale. It's called the tent sale. And it's where we buy all this merchandise at wholesale and then we sell it. And it's really awesome. It's really fun. So usually we advertise for that. We also do flat lays. So the visual merchandiser and the people that work in the store like me, when new product comes in, we do like a flat lay on a board and take a picture so that we can post on social media and show everyone what we have. And then we have our visual merchandiser take pictures like I mentioned. And we also have our phone number and location in every about section of our social media, kind of to prop us up. And if people are coming from out of state, they know where to find us. So then there's the outers. So this is really the customer service and the customers, the relationships that we have, and then, like I said, our corporate partners. So for Just Hatch, it's really, really important to make good relationships with our customers. The atmosphere is so, so important. We really try and make it a friendly and happy environment when those are shopping with us. And so we've had, over the past 25 years, the same customers come in that were once parents and are now grandparents, or parents that, you know, their kids have grown up through the store, which is really, really important and really awesome, because when one grandma starts shopping, then that whole family starts shopping, and then everyone in the community hears about it, their friends, and it's kind of like a snowball effect, which is really cool, because since we live in such a small town, you know, we don't really have that much of a profile and a name. So when everyone in Guilford hears about it, then people out of town start hearing about it. And now with our online website, anyone in the country can hear about it, which is cool. So this is really the research portion. I mean, I know a lot about Just Hatch and how it impacts our small community, but I wanted to see how it was really great for the economy as a whole, especially in the US. And I found that actually 99% of business income for the US economy comes from small businesses, which is really cool. I would have thought that it was like Amazon, but it's not. It's really like small businesses that prop up our economy. And another really cool thing is that 1.9 million job opportunities were created in 2015 just by small businesses. And today, 59.8 million workers are employed by small businesses in 2018 annually. And that's just really cool, because we've really had a hard time since COVID and the pandemic with people losing their jobs. And small businesses have actually helped come out of that and employ more people in the country, and have given more people job opportunities. So before I conclude, I just wanted to quickly talk about my mentor interview. It was really, really great to work with Karen. They know Karen, but Karen is my boss. She's also the owner and founder of Just Hatched. Her idea began when her son was, I think, 3 or 4, and he had skin allergies. And at that time, you know, there wasn't a lot of organically sourced products and clothes. And she just started off with trying to find naturally sourced clothing that wouldn't irritate his skin. And it started with like bin parties where she would buy a ton of stuff and her friends would come over and buy stuff too. And then she opened the store 25 years ago. And now we're still here today. So I thought that it was really cool to work with Karen, because I find small business economy really, really interesting. But to hear it from her perspective was even more interesting. And I'm not going to go over the whole interview, but something that I found really important was when I asked, what do you believe is the biggest impact of Just Hatch on the community? And she said the biggest impact is 25+ years of loyal customer relationships that we've formed. And I found that really interesting, because after 25 years of everything and owning a business and running a business, especially in a suburban community, and going through the pandemic, that's what she finds to be the biggest impact, is the relationships that we have with customers. And I definitely agree. I love going to work every day in a small business and knowing people and having friendly faces come in. So I think that that's really awesome. So here are my main findings. I asked a few questions to myself when I was doing research, because there's so much that goes into a small business that I couldn't possibly touch on everything. So my 2 main findings are that customer relationships really are the heart of a small business, and small businesses actually are the main source of income for local and national economies. And small businesses are so important, not only for us in small communities, but cities and states and our country. So how is a business impacted by a community? It could go both ways. How is a community impacted by a business, and how is a business impacted? And it really is the relationships that we form. And like I mentioned earlier, it is a snowball effect. So every single person that comes in and goes out feeling happy, their friends hear about it, 5 more people hear about it, and then we have a whole community coming together. I think I skipped a slide by accident. Oh yeah, look. It like,
Just hit the,
I'll do it on this
do
one.
the arrow,
Okay. Because I was like, wait, I definitely missed something.
or hit the mouse.
Okay. No, look, it like skips it.
I got you.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
So I was like, wait, I definitely think I'm
You're fine. You're fine. You're
missed
fine.
something. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So another part that I missed about why small businesses are so important to a local community is community outreach. Definitely in Guilford, community outreach is a huge thing. We have it with our programs and through everything. So initially we had this big program called Storytime with Silly Jilly. Jill Russo is a pre-K teacher or former pre-K teacher that now works at Just Hatch. And before COVID, every week she would visit local elementary schools and read to them. And during story time, we'd provide art supplies and the kids would make art. We'd collect the art. We'd display it gallery style in the store. And then every like Friday or Saturday, the parents would come in for a little art show. And we'd have snacks and everything, which is really cute. But unfortunately, COVID smashed that. So we haven't been doing it for the past few years, but hopefully we'll get that program up and running again. But for the meantime, we do still do annual donations. Our two big donation nonprofits are Neighbor to Neighbor and Sarah, which are local nonprofits. And we also are a Bare Necessities donation site. So Bare Necessities is a nonprofit which collects all different formula, diapers, products, anything for children, and it's sent to those that are less fortunate and can't afford to get those things since they're so expensive. And so we're a holding site. So parents come in, they donate diapers, we collect them. And then every 6 months we bring it to Bare Necessities and they distribute it through the National Diaper Association Bank, which is a countrywide thing. So that's really cool that we get to be a part of that. And then we also have a tent at the Little Folks Fair, which was just this past weekend. It's an annual thing, and the Little Folks Fair is a fundraiser for the community nursery school here in Guilford, which is a nonprofit nursery school, so they don't ask for any money. And this is really helpful for those who really can't afford daycare costs. And so by us having a tent there, it's called Come Grow Hair at the Little Folks Fair, and we have dirt and little grass seeds, and we plant stuff and we get donations from parents, then we give back to the community nursery school through the Little Folks Fair, and that helps with their annual funding for the year. So that's also really cool. So anyways, back to what I was saying before. So community outreach is really, really important. You wouldn't think about that in a small business, but community outreach really helps create value that you can't really sell in the store. It creates a name, it creates a reputation, and it really helps the community as a whole. When small businesses are involved in community outreach programs and in the community outreach environment, then every small business in the community ends up having like a web, and then we all contribute to charities in our town, which kind of brings the community together. So what does it take to run a small business? I definitely learned from Karen that it is not easy at all. There's so many different things that go into it that you wouldn't even consider. There's so many different hats to be worn. There's so many different things that go into it. But from what I've learned is that persistence is key. And anyone that wants to run a small business definitely can if they have persistence and patience. And what is the key to customer loyalty? Definitely the environment and the store atmosphere overall. If you're getting good products, you're getting trustworthy people working with you, you're in a good environment, and you're in a local store that you think you're giving back to, it just creates a really, really great relationship where the customer continues to come back, and then they become loyal to us, and then other people become loyal to us, and then we're giving back to the community through them. So it really is like a snowball effect and a chain effect. And it's really great that small businesses, especially in suburban communities, can all come together and benefit the community as a whole, even through the little things. That's it.
Right. Questions from Maddie?
You only interviewed Karen?
Well, yeah. Yeah.
I was surprised. I thought you interviewed Rick and Missy and all.
Well, it was really there was one interview that was required, and because I work with Karen so much and I learned so much about her and so much about the business, I thought that the impactful questions and the most important questions Right. All of the questions that were really significant, I figured would be best to ask her because she was so knowledgeable and I did my project about her store. So there was another possibility of interviewing others about the store or coworkers or having like a community like a possible community questionnaire. But it just didn't end up working out with the timing and it was just a whole process. So I thought that it'd be much more effective to just interview Karen.
Great job, Evan.
Thanks.
Great job.
Yeah.
I'll only just make a suggestion.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Like moving to college, which you're going that direction. I've been a Toastmaster and other presentation groups and stuff like that. So I'm counting your odds and ends.
I had like a script.
Like 53 odds. That's fine. Like, because you're this is your first time. I've never seen you present anything ever like this.
Well,
You
thanks.
crushed
Well, I
it.
had a script, but I didn't want to
Absolutely
read
crushed
off of it.
Crushed
So
it. You crushed that.
thanks.
You missed that slide of Paris. Like,
Thanks.
she-
Well, I
Lucy's
like.
So Lucy's like, whatever, get it back. Crushed it. Right? So just move
Yeah.
forward, man. That's it.
Well,
Crushed that.
it like kind of like skipped over the slide. So when I like clicked it, I thought that.
That's what you're worried about. You're worried about doing it.
Technology errors.
Yeah.
This is things she'd never done. She never had.
Other
never
than
had
that.
the
Totally.
Yeah, so.
Well, I
your
like-
First time presenting, watch that.
Thanks.
Never-
Well, I like had this whole script for like exact, and I like read it like 6 times today. But then I saw Riley
Crushed it.
present, and
You
she.
spoke with a ton of confidence that like it didn't even feel like you needed a
Absolutely.
script.
No, you can't even
Thanks.
tell. You can't
Right.
tell.
The prepper it when you do it without reading off the script, it shows like a different level of preparation,
Absolutely.
which is what you saw when you saw Riley present, which
Yeah.
is why you decided not to use your script.
Yeah. Well, I
Well,
memorized a
Riley-
lot of it that was on
Huh?
there.
What did you tell?
Oh, Riley just went like right before her
Yeah.
and she didn't have I think Maddie was like, oh, she doesn't have a script. And I
Yeah.
think maybe some panic set in, but I
Yeah.
hope not. But
No. I
She-
got the last part of it.
she has created a online tutoring program for Guilford Public Schools.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Okay, so my question is, what did you learn about yourself as a learner doing a capstone project?
So I definitely had 2 takeaways. My first main takeaway was my research skills. I am one to procrastinate. I perform best the last minute. So, usually with like essays or projects or whatever, I do it like that night and I feel super confident and I present the next day. But for this, it really was a process, researching and doing journals every week. And I had to keep myself on track. And I learned that I actually work a little bit better that way. And it was really nice to space everything out and have time to write a script and have time to review and to have time to research. And completing those journals kind of kept me in line. So I definitely learned about myself in the research perspective on how well that I do, like researching ahead of time and really putting forth effort and time into it. So I also learned though about the community itself. I feel like in school we learn a lot about history and we learn about things that happened in the past. But when I was doing this project, I really learned about others around me right now and what's happening right now. And I find that really cool because it taught me a little bit about myself as a person and how I impact the community and how the community is impacted and how great Guilford really is. So, yeah. Thanks.
Mainly because I don't remember, what was the impetus to go from a semester project to a year-long project?
Oh, it was really just timing. My mentor and I had a hard time, I think,
Meeting up, that's
scheduling a
right.
little bit. I mean, she's a very busy woman, so I completely understand. And so I think that we just had a little bit of time management difficulties and I wasn't able to meet with her by the deadline. And I thought that my project would just come out a lot better if I had done it in the long run, which it ended up coming out a lot better. And the research that I came out with and what I came out with thinking was a lot better than I think I had in the first semester. So that's why I moved it.
Yeah, I think that was a good move.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely
well,
smart.
Good job, Mad.
Thanks.
Well done.
You're good.
Yeah, I'm good.
Small business owner.
Oh yeah,
So
and
you
then
go now.